Do we know great art when we see it? Who are the great artists, the most esteemed writers, musicians, painters? Is greatness even measurable, or is it a subjective judgment susceptible to our social biases? Today on Icons of Art, we explore the art and life of the man who is considered the greatest painter of the 20th century. We will look at his bold achievements and monstrous behavior. We will assess the art and the artist. Today, we explore Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso was born in Spain in 1881. In his lifetime, he was a painter, sculptor, printmaker, ceramicist, and stage designer. Picasso started drawing and painting at an early age and received training from his father at the age of 7. By age 13, he had surpassed his father's skills and was quickly recognized for his talent. He painted in a naturalistic and classical manner throughout his childhood and adolescence. Picasso attended prestigious art schools in Madrid and Barcelona until dropping out at 16 due to frustration over formal instruction. From 1900 to 1904, Picasso visited Paris often and lived among many bohemian writers and artists in Barcelona and Paris. By 1900, Picasso's art had moved further from his classical upbringing, and by 1901 he entered what became known as his Blue Period. Inspired in part by the suicide of a close friend, Picasso depicted scenes of poverty and despair, often featuring the poor and downtrodden, as well as mothers with children. Most notably, he painted with shades of blue and green, with only occasional use of warmer colors. He moved permanently to Paris in 1904 and spent the rest of his life in France. With improved spirits, Picasso began his Rose Period in 1904. His paintings at this time show circus performers, clowns, and harlequins, comedic servant characters, and checkered costumes, which were a personal symbol for Picasso. These paintings displayed a lighter, cheerful tone and used warmer colors like red, orange, and pink. After 1906, Picasso adopted more radical art styles. His African influence period ran from 1907 to 1909. Having seen African artifacts at a museum exhibit in June of 1907 and studied ancient Iberian statue heads stolen from the Louvre, Picasso adapted his style to include a vivid color palette, angular planes, defined contours, and flat statue-like figures. These fragmented shapes and flattened human figures inspired Picasso's next art style, Cubism. From 1909 to 1912, along with George Braque, Picasso developed analytical cubism. These cubist paintings often focused on still life and were busy in the center. They used muted, neutral colors, viewed objects in terms of shape, replaced single-point perspective with multiple perspectives, and created fragmentary images that reflected a colorful and moving experience. When the Mona Lisa was stolen in 1911, police arrested and interrogated Picasso's friend, the poet Apollinaire, who implicated Picasso in the theft. In fairness, Picasso had purchased stolen statues from the Louvre from one of Apollinaire's associates. Both men were cleared of any wrongdoing. The Mona Lisa had, in fact, been stolen by an Italian house painter and was recovered 2 years later. From 1912 to 1919, Picasso and other Cubists abandoned the multiple perspectives approach in favor of synthesizing mixed media and creating flattened-out images that forewent the idea of three-dimensional space. Artists started adding texture and pattern to paintings and creating collages with newspaper prints and patterned paper. They broke apart objects and reassembled them in abstract forms. They also used a broader palette and focused on geometric planes and more representable subject matter. Much of Picasso's work from 1917 through the early 1920s is neoclassical. He grew more somber and, once again, preoccupied with depicting reality. In the late 1920s, Picasso returned to Cubism, but was also influenced by Surrealism. He added imaginative responses to the real world, as seen in his increasingly abstract representations of humans and animals. He often showed women as contorted or resembling insects or birds. In the 1930s, Picasso adopted the Minotaur as his personal symbol, replacing the Harlequin. The Minotaur appears in Picasso's most famous painting, Guernica, which shed light on the atrocities of the Spanish Civil War. The Minotaur was an apt symbol of the painter himself, representing his connection to his native Spain and his sexuality and masculinity. As a citizen of neutral Spain living in France, Picasso did not fight in World War I. and though he did not return to Spain to fight in their civil war, he did throw his support behind the Republican cause and against the fascist Franco and his National Party. His painting Guernica was a response to the bombing of the town Guernica in northern Spain by Nazi Germany and the fascist Italy on behalf of the Spanish nationalists. The painting captures the horror of the attack that killed hundreds of civilians. When the Nazis occupied Paris in World War II, Picasso did not join the resistance, but was also unable to exhibit his art as his style ran afoul of Nazi ideals. He continued to paint privately and wrote over 300 poems and a few plays. In 1944, explaining the absence of an artistic response to the war, Picasso said, "I have not painted the war because I am not the kind of painter who goes out like a photographer for something to depict, but I have no doubt that the war is in these paintings I have done." Though Picasso expresses the dread of war in works like Serenade or Skull, he would not provide a direct response to World War II until he painted the Charnel House in 1944 to 1945, a painting whose pile of corpses echoes the atrocities of the Nazi genocide. After the war, Picasso moved to the south of France. Through the 1950s, he explored clay, ceramics, and plaster. He also created his famous anti-war painting, Massacre in Korea, and shared his fascination with his young, ponytailed muse, Sylvette David. Picasso also began reinterpreting the art of the great masters like Velázquez, Rembrandt, Manet, and Delacroix. In the 1960s, Picasso revealed a new character, the Spanish musketeer, and made numerous drawings and etchings of an erotic and graphic nature. In 1967, Picasso designed the 50-foot-high public sculpture in Chicago, known simply as the Chicago Picasso. In his final years, Picasso was incredibly prolific. He combined many of his previous styles, creating colorful and expressive works. Throughout his life, Picasso had numerous unhealthy and destructive relationships with women, a chief criticism of the artist that we will explore in detail later. Picasso died of a heart attack at 91 years old in 1973 and is buried at his chateau near Aix-en-Provence. Picasso is credited as being one of the most influential and talented artists of the 20th century. He explored numerous art styles in his career and created tens of thousands of artworks. He achieved lasting universal renown and considerable wealth. Picasso created some of the most important artworks of the 20th century. Let's examine 8. La Vie portrays a naked couple standing across from a woman holding a child. The two paintings in the background suggest they are in an artist studio. This painting belongs to Picasso's blue period. The blue period is identified by flat expanses of blues, grays, and blacks. The muted and monochromatic palette emphasizes sorrow and suffering. At the time of the painting, Picasso was depressed by the suicide of a friend, the painter Carly Casagemas. Casagemas is depicted as the male figure in the painting. The painting has been interpreted as a symbol of the cycle of life, represented by the infant, young couple, and mother. The painting has also been interpreted as a contrast between sacred love, Mary lovingly holding the infant Jesus, and profane love, the couple's intimacy. In one interpretation, the couple represents Casagemas and his lover Germaine. He is pointing to the family he will never have. She embraces him, but avoids the mother's eye contact, perhaps knowing she will never be the mother of his children. She was already married to someone else and would later become Picasso's lover. In another interpretation, the baby is Picasso as an infant with his mother. On the left side, the male figure is the grown-up Picasso pointing toward his past. The Old Guitarist depicts a poor, hunched-over old blind man playing guitar in the street. The painting is a significant work from Picasso's blue period, which lasted from 1901 to 1904. Picasso's poverty during this time made him identify and relate to social outcasts like the guitarist in the painting. With the little money he can make playing on the street, the subject struggles for survival. Though alienated from society, the guitarist, who may be a symbol for artists in general, depends on the rest of society for survival. On a side note, X-rays of the painting show three figures that have been painted over: an older woman, a young mother with a small child, and an animal. Experts believe at least two different paintings lie beneath the Old Guitarist. Picasso's portrait of Gertrude Stein was an unconventional portrait of an unconventional woman. Gertrude Stein was an art collector, a patron who supported Picasso when he was struggling, and an influential writer. This painting was created during Picasso's Rose period, when his work took on a warm palette and tone. Gertrude Stein was famous for her weekly salons in Paris, where she hosted painters, writers, and critics in her home. Picasso's portrait of Stein challenged traditional ideas of portraiture. The subject is large and heavy and hunched forward. She stares across the image rather than at the viewer. The painting uses dark browns and reds, creating a somber mood. Likely inspired by African and Iberian art, Picasso painted Stein's face in an angular, almost geometric way, which was unrealistic and in contrast to her flattened body shape. His goal was to show Stein as she truly was, but not as she actually appeared. In so doing, Picasso captures the character of an important cultural icon. Further, this new stylistic approach was a precursor to Cubism. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon depicts 5 nude women, presumably from a brothel on a street in Barcelona. For the composition, Picasso was inspired by El Greco's painting The Opening of the Fifth Seal. As with his portrait of Gertrude Stein, Picasso's painting style drew inspiration from Iberian sculpture and African tribal masks with its use of flat, angular shapes. Picasso drew the figures in Les Demoiselles differently. The woman on the left has been described as looking Egyptian or South Asian, the 2 women in the center as Iberian, and the 2 women on the right are in an African mask style. The women in the painting look directly at the viewer without being timid, sorrowful, or even particularly seductive, as would be expected in a brothel scene. Picasso reversed the traditional male gaze and upended the idea of the classical nude. The painting shocked Picasso's friends and was disliked by Braque and Matisse when it was revealed. The painting was considered immoral at its first exhibition, likely due to its original name, the Brothel of Avignon, and the large size of the painting. This painting marks a transitional period in Picasso's art and is considered the first Cubist painting. Girl Before a Mirror is a portrait of Picasso's love and muse, Marie-Thérèse Walter, as she stands in front of a mirror looking at her reflection. Picasso, who was 51, had an affair with the 22-year-old subject. His wife Olga was confronted with this hard fact when Picasso displayed Walter's painting and other nudes of Walter at a retrospective exhibition at Gallery Georges Petit in October 1932. In the painting, the woman views a darker and more dour version of herself. Elements of Cubism can be seen by the breaking down of the woman's body into varying shapes and geometric patterns, and by the contrasting perspectives, as we see the woman from the side, but her reflection from the front. Picasso also brings in a touch of surrealism through the heavily symbolic mirror and its themes of transformation, duality, and psychological introspection. Picasso's use of bright colors and patterns is said to be influenced by Gauguin and Matisse. Picasso reinvents the woman before the mirror art motif, where the woman's view of herself is not a reflection of vanity. Instead, in this painting, the woman sees an older and more grim version of herself, making the work a reflection on mortality. The painting Guernica is 11 feet tall and 25 feet wide. The traumatic, achromatic imagery includes a screaming woman, a bull, a dead soldier, and a gored horse in a city that is in flames. Picasso created the painting after the bombing of Guernica, a small town in northern Spain, by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The bombing came at the request of Francisco Franco's Nationalist Party during the Spanish Civil War. The bombing sparked international outrage as civilians were targeted. Like other Picasso works, the painting combines Cubist figures with heavy surrealist influence, nightmarish imagery, and symbolism in the form of the horse and bull, meaningful figures in Spanish culture. The chaotic scene reveals the depth of the massacre, with crumbling walls, burning buildings, dead bodies, people in mourning, and a broken sword, a sign of defeat. The news of the tragedy is represented by the newsprint used in the horse. The painting has become a symbol protesting the inhumanity of war, a warning against dictators and fascists, and even a symbol for Basque separatism. Weeping Woman depicts Dora Maar, Picasso's mistress and frequent model. Weeping Woman was created at the same time as Guernica, and an image of the Weeping Woman was initially painted in the lower right corner of Guernica before being removed. The image of a weeping woman would become a theme for Picasso and appears in 36 works, 4 of which were oil paintings. The 1937 painting held in the Tate Modern uses bold colors and lines arranged in angular shapes. The face is presented with a mixed perspective and a clear expression of grief. The painting has been described as a metaphor for Picasso's pain, the suffering endured during the Spanish Civil War, and the sadness held by Dora Maar as a result of her abusive relationship with Picasso. The painting is a powerful work of surrealism and a disturbing depiction of grief, no matter its source. The painting was stolen from a private home in 1969, but later it was recovered and loaned to the Tate. Portrait of Dora Maar is another painting by Picasso that depicts his lover Dora Maar. The subject appears elegant and traditionally posed. The painting combines elements of Cubism, the use of multiple perspectives like displaying both the profile of the face and the front of the face, with aspects of Surrealism, using symbols like the left eye of the subject looking outward at the painter and the right eye turning inward toward herself. This duality has been interpreted as representing Picasso's grief over the Spanish Civil War, and also as the anguish of Picasso's maltreated lover, with the bars of the chair suggesting her confinement. If those 8 notable paintings were not enough to convince you of Picasso's artistic greatness, let's examine Picasso using some popular criteria. Some may judge greatness in terms of popularity or by sales figures. Picasso's name is among the top 5 most recognizable artists in poll after poll. He is the most exhibited artist in the world, and of the top 120 most valuable paintings ever sold, 18 are by Picasso. Picasso was prolific. He worked for 78 years and created an impressive amount of art, including 14,000 paintings and drawings, 100,000 prints and engravings, 24,000 book illustrations, and 300 ceramics and sculptures. In terms of quantity, Picasso is unrivaled. Some artists are said to achieve greatness by creating or defining a genre. By co-founding Cubism with George Braca, he changed how subjects were represented by breaking them down into fragmented geometric shapes shown from varying angles. He diverged from realism and paved the way for abstraction and conceptual art. Picasso's influence on other artists was immense. Picasso's experimentation encouraged artists to explore new forms and techniques. He inspired others to broaden their choice of subjects. His willingness to break with tradition and reject artistic orthodoxy was a catalyst for modern art. In the annals of 20th century art, no other artist can claim the recognition and acclaim that Picasso attained. He received unprecedented recognition during his lifetime and built a legacy that persists long after his passing. Picasso was a skilled painter. He received years of formal training and was recognized for his talents. But whatever greatness he achieved came after he departed from classical approaches. Picasso once said, "When I was the age of these children, I could draw like Raphael. It took me many years to learn how to draw like these children." Picasso may be most recognized for his creativity. He experimented with perspective, form, and media. He worked with conventional subjects, everyday objects, the human form, and unconventional subjects, African and Iberian art and social outcasts. And he expressed these subjects through distorted and fragmented perspectives. What I value most in Picasso's paintings is his aptitude for artistic expression, his sheer strength of communicating ideas and emotions, even if those ideas and emotions are demoralizing, upsetting, or repugnant. First, let's look at how he expressed emotion. One clear example of emotional expression comes from his Blue Period paintings that evoke despair and depression through his choice of subjects and color, and his depiction of people, their bodies, their expressions, and their life situations. Second, Picasso was an effective communicator. He delivered his anti-war message by showing us the twisted and grotesque realities of war and condemning the inhumanity of bombing in the Spanish Civil War, the murdering of innocents in World War II, and an American massacre in the Korean War. Third, Picasso gave us powerful depictions of his interpersonal relationships, particularly his thoughts on the women in his life. Picasso captures the agony of Dora Maar, who was abused by Picasso in the Weeping Woman painting. He reveals his contempt for his first wife, Olga Hoklova, and her physical suffering enlarged nude in a red armchair. And he displays his lust for his new 22-year-old mistress, Marie-Thérèse Walter, in The Dream. Picasso's life and work was not without criticism, which typically comes in 2 forms: cultural appropriation and misogyny. While it's important to differentiate between the art and the artist, These criticisms of the artist may inform how you see his work and how you value it. In 1907, Picasso visited the Trocadero Ethnographic Museum and studied a collection of African tribal masks. Shortly after, the painting Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was begun and included two figures with exaggerated mask-like faces. European artists from Matisse to Picasso were interested in tribal objects from Africa, Iberia, and Oceania, like masks and statues. The years 1906 to 1909 have been described as Picasso's African period, where he created several works influenced by African art. This influence was further developed during Picasso's Cubist period. Over the years, Picasso collected hundreds of African artworks. The painter Paul Gauguin, who had a strong influence on Picasso, first visited Tahiti in 1891 and later moved to the French colony. He incorporated Tahitian models and imagery in his art. Gauguin popularized what would become known as Primitivism, an art style that set out to capture and romanticize what it considered a more primitive place and people. Primitivists even copied the techniques, motifs, and styles of non-Western and non-white societies. Primitivism has been criticized for perpetuating racial stereotypes and reinforcing colonial rule. Did Picasso make the same mistakes as his predecessors? Was Picasso showing cultural appreciation or engaged in cultural appropriation? Was he respectfully borrowing cultural ideas and imagery, or copying and stealing from other cultures without acknowledgement? On the one hand, while Picasso's art clearly shows examples of African art, it has not been found to be direct copies of specific works. Each is a composite idea from multiple works. In addition, Picasso's work challenged the naturalism of traditional art and used experimental techniques, of which borrowed imagery was only one. On the other hand, while Picasso acknowledged that African art had sparked his creativity and recognized its spiritual force, he later strongly denied that African art was a source of inspiration. And Picasso, like Gauguin, often sexualized the women in the paintings, contributing to the age-old romanticizing of the exotic and fetishization of non-Western women. Picasso's incorporation of African and Iberian influences may color how we see some of his most significant work. If there is one problem with Picasso that you are probably already aware of, it is his infamous treatment of the women in his life. So let's explore his many relationships to see how Picasso treated women and how this was expressed in his art. Picasso met Germaine Pichot at an artist studio where she was a model when he was visiting Paris in 1900. His best friend, Carle Casahemas, also came on the trip, fell in love with Pichot, who was already married, and in 1901 shot her and himself at a restaurant after she had refused to live with him as his fiancée. She was merely grazed by the bullet, but Casahemas died. In May 1901, Picasso took up with Pichot. She would go on to marry a different painter in 1906. The woman known only as Madalena spent a short time with Picasso in the summer of 1904. She was soon pregnant and had an abortion at his insistence. She appears in many of Picasso's late Blue Period works. In the fall of 1904, Picasso met Fernanda Olivier near his Paris studio. She was an artist and a model, and was the inspiration for Picasso's Rose period. She would later say in her memoirs that Picasso was so jealous that he would lock her inside, and their fights would, at times, escalate to violence. In 1907, Olivier adopted a 13-year-old girl, the orphan daughter of a prostitute. She later found new drawings of the girl made by Picasso and sent her back to the orphanage. Picasso met Olivier's friend Eva Guel in 1911, and the two became lovers. In 1912, Olivier and Picasso separated. She kept a memoir of the time, and Picasso paid her not to publish her memoir until after they both died. Despite the small pension for Picasso's compensation, she died deaf and penniless. Picasso met Eva Guel in 1911 at the Café Hermitage in Paris when she was living with the painter Louis Marcoussis. Olivier and Guel became friends. Olivier confided in Guel, telling her she was unhappy with Picasso and having an affair with the Italian painter Ubaldo Opie. She asked Guel to cover for her to deceive Picasso. Instead, Guel began a secret affair with Picasso herself. Picasso added coded images and phrases referencing Guel in his works. Picasso discovered Olivier's affair, kicked her out of their apartment, and ended any financial support. Guel left her boyfriend and moved in. By 1913, Guel was suffering from either tuberculosis or cancer. By 1915, she was often hospitalized. Well died on December 14, 1915. She was just 30 years old. Author Norman Mailer described Guel as small, sweet, superficially submissive, orderly, thrifty, and devoted to Picasso. Her 4 years with Picasso were generally peaceful, and she was seemingly able to avoid Picasso's fits of anger, likely due to her submissive personality. She hid the extent of her illness from Picasso as long as she could and died near the end of 1915. While Guel was terminally ill with tuberculosis, Picasso began an affair with Gabrielle Lespinasse. She lived near Picasso's studio, and he had likely seen her in a cabaret show. The affair was kept secret as Guel was ill, and Lespinasse was in a relationship with the artist and poet Herbert Lespinasse. Picasso visited her often in her home and made several naturalistic sketches of her on which he wrote love messages. Picasso proposed marriage but was rejected by Lespinasse, who went on to marry Herbert in 1917. By the spring of 1916, Picasso was romantically interested in the artist Irene Legoux, and, with the poet Apollinaire, kidnapped her, according to John Richardson in his book A Life of Picasso. So on the rebound, in the spring of 1916, Picasso fell madly in love with Irene Legoux. He and a friend, the poet Guillaume Apollinaire, abducted her. They took her to a villa in the Paris suburbs, but Picasso didn't fasten the shutters well and she escaped, although she came back on her own accord a week later. Their on and off relationship fell apart by the end of 1916, and she, like Lespinasse, turned down his plans for marriage. She became involved with Picasso again in 1923 and is featured in his painting, The Lovers. Picasso had a short relationship with the model and actress Paquette in the summer and fall of 1916. In her memoirs, Gertrude Stein described her simply as nice. While designing sets and costumes for a ballet in Paris in 1917, Picasso met and fell for a Russian ballerina named Olga Khokhlova. She left the dance company and ran off with Picasso to Barcelona, where, lacking a passport, she couldn't leave. The two married in 1918, likely the result of her refusing to have sex with him until they were married. She was Picasso's first wife. Khokhlova hurt her foot right before marriage and was often sick thereafter, which damaged the marriage. She went through months of painful rehab and never danced again. They had a son, Paolo, in 1921. Khokhlova became seriously ill in 1922 with gynecological problems. Picasso, likely still troubled by the illness and death of Eva Guel, grew resentful of Khokhlova for her illness and became unfaithful. Picasso would later say, "Women's illnesses are always women's fault." This resentment, along with parenting disagreements and Khokhlova's jealousy, led to marriage difficulties. In 1927, Picasso began an affair with 17-year-old Marie-Thérèse Walter. Khokhlova was 36 by this time, Picasso was 45. While many believe Khokhlova was aware of the affair, the last straw was drawn when Picasso showed off his previously secret affair with suggestive paintings of Walter at a retrospective exhibit at the Gallery Georges Petit in 1932, which made Khokhlova jealous. In 1935, a friend told Khokhlova about the affair and that Walter was pregnant. Picasso separated from Khokhlova but would not divorce her as he refused to separate the property evenly as required by law. Their marriage did not end until she died in 1955. After the breakup, Khokhlova was described as neurotic and unwilling to accept their separation, even stalking Picasso and sending him repeated hate mail. With her cancer advancing, she asked to see Picasso before her death. He refused. Picasso's early paintings of Khokhlova were traditional, admiring, and antithetical to his Cubist work at the time. Picasso's later paintings of Khokhlova reflect his disgust for her, showing her as a monster in the painting Large Nude in a Red Armchair. About this painting, Picasso said, "It must be painful for a girl to see in a painting that she's on the way out." Picasso would go on to depict Khokhlova as a horse gored by Picasso, the Minotaur. Their only son suffered from depression and alcoholism and died in 1975, just 2 years after Picasso. After the death of Picasso, Paolo's son and Picasso's grandson Pablito was turned away from Picasso's home and not allowed to attend the funeral. Pablito responded by drinking a bottle of bleach and dying 3 months later. Picasso met the 17-year-old Marie-Thérèse Walter on the street in 1927 and implored her to pose for him. Although she did not know who he was, she agreed and met him at his studio 3 days later. Though married to Khokhlova, Picasso began a sexual affair with Walter just a week after she began posing for him. She became Picasso's most famous muse and was the subject of numerous paintings and sculptures during his surreal era. Picasso worked to keep the affair secret and rented an apartment for Walter where he could see her privately. In 1928, when his family spent the summer at the beach in northwestern France, Picasso enrolled Walter in a nearby summer camp for girls and continued seeing her secretly. His wife Haklova was often seriously ill from 1928 to 1930, and Picasso used her long stays in hospitals and clinics to stay with Walter. In 1932, Picasso's major retrospective exhibit at Gallery Georges Petit featured numerous provocative works of Walter, effectively publicizing the affair. Haklova was markedly jealous by this point, and many believe she knew about the affair. In 1934, Walter became pregnant, and Picasso moved her into a neighboring house in Paris. By 1935, Haklova was informed of the affair and pregnancy by a friend and left. Picasso and Walter's daughter Maya was born in 1935. By this time, Picasso was already seeing other women, and would begin a long relationship with Dora Maar in 1936. Picasso maintained relationships with both Maar and Walter at the same time. Unsurprisingly, the two women did not get along, and it is rumored that they met accidentally at Picasso's studio and a fight ensued. Picasso combined their portraits in Girl with a Red Beret and Pom-Pom, perhaps expressing his divided or transitioning affections. Their relationship ended in 1936. Picasso continued to visit Walter and their daughter. When Haklova died in 1955, Picasso asked Walter to marry him. She refused. After Picasso died in 1973, Walter struggled and hung herself in 1977. Near the end of his relationship with Walter, Picasso was romantically involved with Valentine Hugo, former partner of Surrealist André Breton, and Alice Raon, wife of Surrealist artist Wolfgang Paulin, before eventually leaving Walter for photographer Dora Maar. Picasso met Dora Maar at Café Les Deux Magots in Paris. She had laid her black-gloved hand upon a table and was playing the knife game, in which one rapidly stabs a knife between each finger. Picasso asked to keep one of her blood-stained gloves, and thus their 9-year relationship began. Maar was raised in Argentina and spoke Spanish, which appealed to Picasso. She moved to Paris to study painting. On meeting Henri Cartier-Bresson, she was persuaded to take up photography and changed her name to something shorter and catchier. Maar would go on to become a talented painter and photographer. Maar's mother was apparently so opposed to the relationship that she died from a stroke she had while arguing about the relationship with Maar over the phone. Although Maar was stronger and more independent than Walter, she was not immune to Picasso's treatment of her. First, Picasso was, unsurprisingly, unfaithful. In 1945, she discovered he was having an affair and told him, "As an artist, you may be extraordinary, but morally speaking, you are worthless." Second, he often compared her to Walter and fostered competition and jealousy between the two. Last, Picasso was known to be physically abusive to Maar. To the art world, Maar is best known as Picasso's muse and the woman who portrayed the face of Picasso's Weeping Woman series. Picasso captured her anguish and inner turmoil in a series of paintings depicting her as a weeping woman. The figure appears in Guernica, a painting for which Maar provided political and artistic inspiration, but was later removed by Picasso before the painting's completion. The figure is seen more prominently in Weeping Woman 1937. Historians point to the Weeping Woman era as a time when Picasso's images of her turned from kind to cruel. In her 1964 book, Life with Picasso, François Gillot recalls Picasso explaining, "I couldn't make a portrait of her laughing. For me, she's the weeping woman. For years I've painted her in torture forms, not through sadism and not with pleasure either, just obeying a vision that forced itself on me." Maar never liked the Weeping Woman portraits, responding, "All portraits of me are lies. They're Picasso's. Not one is Dora Maar." He would tell his next lover about Maar, "Women are machines for suffering." After their relationship ended, Maar suffered from severe depression and was hospitalized and treated with electroshocks. Maar moved to the south of France, living in a home bought by Picasso. Despite her talent and success, Picasso convinced her to give up photography as he considered it an inferior art form. And though she gave up her photography career, she went on to create many impressive paintings. Sadly, most of these were not discovered until after she died. Maar's final years were spent in Paris, where she lived impoverished and reclusive. François Gillot was an accomplished artist who studied English literature, philosophy, and law at several prestigious universities. When Gillot was 21 years old, she met Picasso in a restaurant. He was 61 at the time and still with Dora Maar. Gillot moved in with him in 1946. They did not marry but had 2 children, Claude and Paloma. Gillot was confident and had a strong will. He did not know me well at all. I'm very secretive. I smile and I'm polite, but that doesn't mean that I'm in agreement or that I will do as I said I would do. It's just a screen. He thought I would react like all his other women. That was a completely wrong opinion. I had other ideas. Although they were together for nearly 10 years, the relationship did not go smoothly. Gillot was harassed on the streets of Paris by Picasso's estranged but legal wife, Olga Khokhlova. Like Dora Maar, Gillot was also subjected to physical abuse. Picasso expressed his twisted misogyny with Gillot when he told her, "For me, there are only two kinds of women, goddesses and doormats." Gillot eventually left, unable to tolerate the abuse and infidelity. After she left, Picasso destroyed her artwork, personal possessions, and career by convincing galleries not to exhibit her work. Gillot wrote her memoir, Life with Picasso, 11 years after they split up. Picasso unsuccessfully sued to prevent its publication and never saw their two children again. Gillot met polio vaccine creator Jonas Salk in 1969 and married him in 1970. She died in 2023 in New York City at the age of 101. 17-year-old Genevieve Laporte interviewed Picasso for a school newspaper in 1944. 7 years later, their affair began after Laporte visited Picasso, then 70, at his studio. He was still with Gillot at the time. Despite having just had two children with Gillot, Picasso took Laporte to Saint-Tropez in the summer of 1951 and left Gillot behind. The day after Gillot moved out, Picasso asked Laporte to move in. She refused, and their relationship ended. Laporte went public with their affair in 1972. In 2005, she auctioned off 20 drawings Picasso made of her. Jacqueline Roca was Picasso's second and last official wife, and was with him for 19 years until his death. Roca met Picasso while she was working at a pottery store on the French Riviera. She was 26, Picasso was 70, and, as with Laporte, Picasso was still in a relationship with Françoise Gillot. He pursued her for 6 months before she agreed to date him. She told him, "If one day there is another muse, I'll congratulate her. I'll send her flowers, but I'll be out the door." After Gillot left in 1953, he saw Roca nearly every day. Though his friends disapproved of her, Picasso was drawn to her submissiveness and obsessive love of him. In the summer of 1954, Picasso and Roca had a huge argument, and Roca became suicidal. A friend staying with them that summer noted, "Picasso's attitude towards her was embarrassingly disagreeable, while hers was embarrassingly submissive. She referred to him as her god, spoke to him in the third person, and frequently kissed his hands." She moved in with Picasso in October 1954. After Picasso's first wife, Olga Khokhlova, died in February 1954, they were able to marry and did so in 1961. They were married 12 years before he died. Their marriage likely lasted as he never painted another woman, and she was successful in keeping him free of any unwanted visitors, including old friends and relatives. She suffered greatly after his death and would often declare that he was not dead. The night of his death, she slept over his grave in the snow. Later, she prevented his children, Claude and Paloma, from attending his funeral, apparently Picasso's wishes. She also prevented his grandson, Pablito, from attending due to a conflict Picasso had with him before his death. As a result, Pablito drank bleach and died. A long legal fight over Picasso's estate followed. She never recovered from his loss and shot herself with his gun in their house in 1986. She is represented in over 400 Picasso works, 160 of which are portraits. She usually appears with an exaggerated neck, Greek nose, and a feline face. There are some clear trends in Picasso's treatment of women. Keep in mind that the list is certainly not complete and does not consider the numerous short-term affairs, women whose stories were never told, and sex workers Picasso frequently visited. But is this treatment an indictment of the man as a person or artist? Are modern viewers simply looking to cancel a great artist and unwilling to separate the art from the artist? That argument of separation would be more viable except for the fact that Picasso painted the women in his life continually, capturing their beauty but also exploiting their sorrow, showing off his new mistress, and revealing his disgust for their suffering and illness. Insight into his life necessarily colors the way one sees his work.
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on fait?
Was Picasso the greatest visual artist of the 20th century? His popularity is unrivaled, whether measuring the number of exhibitions, name recognition, or sales. He founded Cubism and left his mark on Surrealism. His influence is immeasurable, changing how people used perspective, conveyed forms, and worked with media. He was creative and expressive. He created thousands of works, but many lives were crushed in his wake. Greatness, whatever that word might mean and how little that word might mean, doesn't need to incorporate a moral center. Maybe great artists don't need to be likable, but then maybe we don't need to like them either. We don't need to engage with their art or even watch a 40-minute video about it. Thank you for watching. Please share your thoughts on Picasso down in the comments below. I'd also love to see your choice for the greatest artist of the 20th century as well. Liking the video and subscribing to this channel will go a long way toward helping me create the next one.